Check out a Kickstarter campaign we're doing right now. We're trying to raise funds for our next film. It's called Vice Bear. It's about the ice bear, the polar bear, that's been used and abused by climate change alarmists for years. But they've gotten the whole story wrong. They've gotten the facts backwards. And if they can't get this right, why should we trust them with anything else? That's kind of the gist of the campaign. We're going to be running it for 60 days starting today. So please check it out and consider supporting us. Thank you so much. I want the best and the most beautiful and the most thriving world that anybody's ever seen. I want to live in the freest country that anybody's ever experienced, in the most prosperous place that could ever be imagined. And I hope that 100 years from now, the environment that we live in, the freedom that we enjoy, and the prosperity that we've had will be nothing compared to what future generations will see. But I'm afraid that the solutions that our culture has about climate change and environmentalism and the green movement are answers that will not take us to where we want to go. I'm convinced that the ideas underneath the green movement, that its true motives threaten freedom, they jeopardize prosperity, and they limit the potential that we have to truly build a better, more beautiful world. I believe that there's a better way. And that's what this film is about. My name is J.D. King, and I'm on a mission to save the Earth. I'm going to be exploring how environmentalism has negatively impacted our world and the people who live here by talking with leading experts and scientists who disagree with the status quo. I'll also be meeting with average Americans whose lives have been affected by the green movement. As a Christian, I believe we were created to be stewards and managers of the Earth. Growing up in Montana is probably what gave me my passion for the environment. This is my second film on the subject.
If you have a basically misanthropic worldview, if you see human beings as basically consumers and polluters, as a bad thing, as cancer, as a virus, as people pollution, right? If that's your view of people, then you want to see fewer people and you want to see them not thriving but just barely subsisting, because you think that their numbers and their prosperity are a harm to the earth.
I met up with Calvin Beisner, the founder and national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. One of his biggest concerns is that green doesn't care enough about human prosperity and freedom.
What history tells us is that as people prosper more and more, they take better and better care of the environment. You know, if you're worried about putting food on the table, clothes on the back, and a roof over the head, you really don't care about smog. You don't care about chemical runoff into the streams. Environmentalism gets the whole thing backward. It thinks that people are better off if they're poor, and in reality, they're better off if they're wealthy, but so is the environment.
Forget the studies for a second, look at the world. You know, where folks have the resources to protect the environment and improve the environment, they do. You know, the environment in richer countries is better than the environment in poorer countries. You know, where folks have to rely on things like burning wood or subsistence farming, the environment suffers. You know, again, it's not a hypothetical, it's not a study. Anybody who's been outside the developed world can tell you that with their own eyes, right?
I met Mike McKenna when he was touring the country as a spokesperson for the American Energy Alliance, The sides of his bus were covered in hundreds of signatures from people demanding less of green and more prosperity.
You know, if you think that we can't deploy our energy resources in an environmentally responsible way, that's ridiculous. Because every day in every way we do that. And every day in every way we're getting better at it. And to imagine that the world is like it was in the 19th century, you're just not paying any attention.
Green says that wealth creation is a bad thing for the planet. But the truth that I'm discovering indicates that it's actually one of the best possible things we can do for the environment because it gives us the resources that we need to improve the planet in the best way possible. Green also does not understand that energy production brings wealth, and with that comes something this country desperately needs: jobs.
There's no doubt that the more you produce, the more energy you produce, you're going to encourage the manufacturing sector, right? If you think about oil and gas, right? Every job in the oil and gas sector leads to 3.5 jobs on the outside. Every manufacturing job leads to 5 jobs outside the fence line. So, there's no doubt in my mind that if you make oil and gas more readily available, more reliable, less expensive, you're going to have more economic growth. No doubt.
It's simple. A clean, healthful, beautiful environment is a costly good. Wealthy people can afford more costly goods than poor people can.
So what about all the big corporations, the big evil corporations that are raping and pillaging the planet at the expense of all the rest of us?
You know what? That does occur. But the question we need to be asking is, compared to what? And what are the alternatives? Okay. First of all, governments have far and away the worst environmental records. Corporations don't come close to what governments do to their environments. The Soviet Union's near destruction of Lake Baikal by reversing the flow of some rivers brought on an environmental disaster that outdoes anything that's ever happened in the Western world. Much of what China has done, for instance with the damming of the Yangtze River, has done similar things. Governments are far more destructive of the environment than corporations. And so what? We want to give government more power to do more destruction of the environment? The healthiest forests in North America are those forests that are privately owned. The least healthy forests, the ones where you'll get these massive forest fires that break out, are the ones that are owned by the U.S. Forest Service.
One problem that people have when they think about these issues is they don't have a very good long-term historical grasp of things. And so people don't think about, for example, that 110 years ago, at the beginning of the 20th century, the predominant mode of transportation in our cities was horses. Now, the average horse ate something like 30 pounds of feed a day, and you can imagine the amount of manure and urine that was produced. 100,000 horses in New York City, you can imagine what it smelled like. And in fact, the public health authorities at the time said this is a real health problem. Until we get rid of horses and bring in automobiles and something motorized, public health is going to suffer. And in fact, respiratory disease rates in American cities were 8 times higher 100 years ago than they are today. And so the irony is that the automobile ended up being an environmental improvement for our cities. They actually cleaned up the cities.
In early stages of a society moving from basically agrarian system, agrarian society, to an industrialized society, you have a great increase in pollution emissions. And that seems bad from an environmental perspective, but the wealth that is brought about by that enhances human life so much that lifespans increase, death rates decrease, especially infant and child mortality fall very quickly. And then as people get wealthier, they can afford then to clean up the pollution emissions, to prevent the pollution emissions, and you wind up with pollution peaking and then falling off, and you wind up with a cleaner environment after development than before development.
So here's a shocking statistic. If you parked a 1970 Mustang in your driveway and then went to the dealer and bought a brand new 2013 Ford Mustang today and drove it down the highway at 50 miles an hour or any speed, guess which one of those Mustangs would be emitting more air pollution? It would be the one parked in your driveway from 1970. And so it's astounding. I mean, the reduction in what we call tailpipe emissions, the bad stuff coming out the back end of the car, is down, in some cases, 99.9% from 30 years ago.
Environmentalism, because it sees people as consumers and polluters, doesn't understand that economic development is actually the best friend of environmental stewardship.
So one of the reasons that forests have come back in the United States, especially in the east and northeast, is we're not using all that land to grow feed for horses anymore. So the automobile led directly to the conservation of tens of millions of acres of farmland in this country. The other thing about 100 years ago is we got almost a third of our energy, total energy, from burning wood. That's another reason we cut down a lot of trees, is you're heating yourself with wood. Now, wood is sort of a renewable resource because it grows back. On the other hand, when you're cutting down the trees faster than they can grow, which is what was happening, you start running out of trees. That's what led Theodore Roosevelt to predict a timber famine in the country in, I think, 1901 or 1902. In another important respect, the development of oil and natural gas and fuel oil and coal, for that matter, to replace wood as an energy source, led also directly to the restoration of American forests.
But even if switching to fossil fuels helped clean up the cities and reduced health problems, we're told now that it's causing a crisis.
Greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide trap heat. Burning fossil fuels release those gases into the air.
Man-made global warming pollution causes global warming.
The sea will turn to like a jello, the sky will turn green, and we'll be dead.
There are many scientists who disagree with the assertion that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. In fact, many are saying that it's actually making our world greener. One such scientist is Leighton Stewart, the founder of PlantsNeedCO2.org. His views on climate change and carbon dioxide have changed dramatically since he began to critically look at the issue for himself.
When I started this 7 years ago, I was on the other side. I assumed CO2 was the big problem.
You've come 180 degrees.
I've come 180 degrees.
Wow.
The CO2 level in Earth's atmosphere used to be 7,000 parts per million. You and I are breathing only 390 right now. And because I'm a geologist, because I'm accustomed to looking back to see what's happened to Earth over the past years to understand why it's like it is today, I have gone and taken the same approach on climate change and tried to see what this relationship has been in Earth's past climate. And the empirical evidence just does not back up these catastrophic warming forecasts. This graph right here shows you 2,000 years of Earth's history. Earth was actually somewhat warmer during the medieval warm period, as you can see, than it is now. But right here, at the year 1715, is when Earth started its current warming trend and came up through here. Yet man only started putting CO2 in the atmosphere 150 years ago. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand this. And then when you see that Earth had cooled for 500 years, even though the red line, which is CO2 level, was not changing. How did it cool for 500 years? No influence from CO2. How did it warm for 500 years here with no influence from CO2? If CO2 was supposed to be the big driver of climate change. The age-old test of a hypothesis is, will the hypothesis stand up to real observations? And CO2 flunks that test.
Leighton Stewart is not alone in his assessment of carbon dioxide. There are other scientists out there, including Robert Zubrin. He has degrees